This is Harren K. Appelman, Technical Director of Nakamichi Research, U.S.A., speaking to you from our recently expanded facilities in Carle Place, New York. Before I go any further, I want to apologize for the long delay in getting this, our fifth news cassette, to you. Reaction to our first four was so overwhelmingly positive that it was clear we had to continue producing Nakamichi Spoken Here. But as you already know, 1976 was a very busy and fast-moving year for us. With all the work involved in preparing and promoting our new 600 series products, it was really impossible to sit down and record a news cassette, even though I realize something like this is perhaps more necessary now than ever before. And please remember that Nakamichi Spoken Here cassettes are duplicated at real time, in other words, sort of handmade, and that making a couple hundred copies to get out to you is a time-consuming project. But now that we have the real-time duplicating facilities here in New York, I promise you that Nakamichi Spoken Here will appear in your mail a little more regularly. I also want to take this chance to clarify my situation vis-a-vis the company. I know that in previous Nakamichi Spoken Here cassettes, I mentioned my upcoming assignment in Europe. Well, as you can see, I'm not in Europe. It's a long story, but let's just say that my base of operation has shifted to New York. Although I'll be traveling from time to time in the U.S. and abroad, I'll be right here most of the time, so you should be able to get in touch with me without too much trouble. There's a lot I want to cover because it's been so long and so much has been happening, but I'll limit myself in this tape to the discussion of what is probably the hottest Nakamichi topic of the year, our 600 series components. First, a little background. In the spring of 1973, Nakamichi officially announced to the world the first three-head cassette deck, the Model 1000, amid predictions by industry experts, I might add, that the product was doomed to join the ranks of things like the 16 RPM record. But the relative success of the Nakamichi 1000 prompted us to introduce the 700 in the following year because it was fairly obvious that there was indeed a market for high-quality three-head cassette decks. Shortly thereafter, Nakamichi established a clear position of leadership in the cassette field by giving the world a professional quality two-head on-location deck, the 550, and a two-head home component cassette deck with open reel sound quality, the 500. It was during late 1975, however, that a germ of an idea in Mr. Nakamichi's head began to take shape. A new approach in terms of design and technology was to grow and become one of the most unique and acclaimed products in recent high-fidelity history. The Nakamichi 600 cassette console, a two-head deck that many consider to have the performance of three-head units. Even before the announcement of the 600 in the spring of 1976, Mr. Nakamichi and his staff of engineers and designers were already contemplating the emergence of an entirely new series of products. For Nakamichi, this series would mean a radical departure from specialization in cassette decks, something other manufacturers have tried in the past and failed. But once the commitment was made, much time, effort, and money was spent on research and development. A special team of Nakamichi engineers have spent many overtime hours on the 600 series project, and I think that the results are well worth the effort. The Model 600 cassette console represents an entirely new way of thinking in the design of cassette decks. It is, of course, a very unusual-looking cassette deck, but the design philosophy runs much deeper than simply wanting to look different. The 600 was built on a solid foundation of human engineering, on a careful study of how people actually use cassette decks. Most of today's cassette decks can be grouped into two basic types. There is the table type, or the horizontal units, and the shelf type, or the vertical units. In actual use, a table type must be placed rather low in order to give the user a bird's eye view of the meters and controls. A shelf or vertical type, on the other hand, should be at eye level for maximum ease of operation. But most cassette deck users are not willing to go to either extreme in a home setup, so they usually end up compromising ease of use for ease of installation. In designing the 600, we took into account the fact that most users view and operate their decks from some angle. We decided on the 35-degree angle as that which gave the maximum latitude in terms of visual and operational considerations. Similarly, in the engineering of the 600, we took into account much more than measured performance. Of course, conventional performance data is important and useful in engineering, but we felt it was equally important to come up with a deck that sounds as good as it measures, or even better than it measures. Our experiments included exhaustive listening tests. The results can be seen in the 600's unique circuitry, which includes advances such as virtually complete phase recovery and the IM suppressor. Introduced at about the same time as the Model 600 was the Nakamichi 610 control preamplifier. A quick glance at the 610's front panel makes it obvious that it's much more than just a companion model to the 600. The ominous rows of push buttons and knobs scare away a lot of potential customers, I suppose, and maybe even a number of potential salesmen. I admit it's confusing at first, but once you get used to it, you'll agree that everything on the 610 is quite logically laid out. I think most audiophiles will feel the way I do about the 610, and that is, once you master the operation of this versatile unit, you begin to appreciate its true capabilities, and all of a sudden, it's very tough to do without the 610 in your system. I'm not just saying this to hype you, although you can try it out on your customers if you want to. I really feel this way about this product. Anyway, reading the literature on the 610 will tell you much of what I'm saying, but the two main selling points to remember are the 610's versatility and its performance. There are 5 low-noise wide dynamic range microphone inputs with specs better than a lot of professional mixing consoles. Distortion and noise is state-of-the-art throughout the preamp, especially the 2 phono preamplifiers. I know specs can become a numbers game, and they don't necessarily tell you how the unit is going to sound, but take phono preamp noise. Low noise is absolutely essential for a good sounding phono preamp. The 610 gives you 80 dB signal-to-noise ratio referenced to a 1 mV input level while maintaining a 1 mV sensitivity and a 250 mV overload point. Most manufacturers give their signal-to-noise specs referenced to a 10 mV input. If we did that for the 610, we'd have a 100 dB signal-to-noise ratio. One of the so-called golden ear audiophile magazines stated that the 610 achieved good phono signal-to-noise partially through designing with less than average gain. Well, phono input sensitivity is 1 mV on the 610. This translates to an overall 60 dB of gain, which I would say is better than average. But no matter. We've long since learned to ignore self-appointed audio critics. Now, getting back to the 610, I think its real value lies in its ability to gracefully handle the interfacing of all the separate components one finds in modern stereo systems. Loudspeakers, power amplifiers, turntables, tape decks, tuners, so forth. It's true that all modern preamplifiers let you interconnect all these components, but try finding one that gives you the degree of control and flexibility the 610 does. It's definitely for home use, but it looks like it was made for broadcast studio. The master level control is a precision stepped resistor, not just a potentiometer with click stops. It lets you control the recording and listening level precisely, without the shifting and sound image that so often accompanies conventional faders. And the test tones. There are so many things you can do with the built-in tone and the pink noise generators on the 610. For example, with the 610 alone, the advanced audiophile can do all the major calibrations on open reel and cassette decks. Pink noise can be used for loudspeaker phase and dispersion checking, as well as for experimentation and equalization. And I personally think pink noise is a must for properly setting up any kind of tape deck. Let me just sum up the Nakamichi 610 as a sort of almighty top-performing preamplifier. Its worth is really difficult to describe. It's the kind of product you begin to appreciate more and more as you own and use it. Moving on to the 620. This power amplifier is unconventional in some ways and yet conventional in others, but its unconventionality isn't only skin deep. In fact, the 620 being a solid-state Class B power amplifier is about where its conventionality ends. Now, I don't want to bore you here with a lot of technical talk on the engineering behind the 620, but take my word for it, it is an unusual design. The brochure on the 620 will give you some idea, but if you really want to be bored, read the technical bulletin on the 620. It will be available shortly. Suffice to say that the 620 is an exceptionally clean amp. Distortion is so low that we went to a new scale for stating THD spec. ppm stands for parts per million, and with an 8-ohm load, the 620 has under 5 ppm of total harmonic distortion at any power level from 1 to 100 watts at 1 kHz. Now that translates to 0.0005% total harmonic distortion. You can't measure that on a distortion meter, not even the sound technology. You need a spectrum analyzer like the BNK 3348 to confirm those measurements. Noise on the 620 is an unheard of 120 dB below rated output. Impressive specs, you say, but how does it sound? Well, in 3 words, I'd have to say clean, clean, clean. Listen to it yourself. With the introduction of the 620, we decided to announce another Nakamichi brainchild, the System 1 rack. As you know, the System 1 rack combines the matte black versions of the 600 and 610 with the 620 power amplifier into one neat monolithic block of components. The digital timer at top functions as an accurate digital clock as well as an automatic timer for self-start and self-stop operations. With an FM tuner, you can make unattended recordings of broadcasts. It adds a new dimension in home components, and its advantages are many-fold. These days, with the popularity of separate components, the typical living room of a hi-fi enthusiast is getting to look more and more like a dealer's showroom. The system takes up a lot of space, and wiring becomes a jungle. The 600 series, by their very design, eliminates most of these problems. The 3 components can be laid side by side to form an attractive yet compact stereo center, which puts all the major controls at one level and eliminates the problems of interconnection and hiding long cables. If shelf space is at a premium, and you're willing to give up the advantages of angled panel operation, the System 1 rack is an ideal solution. And you don't know what ease of wiring means until you've set up a System 1 rack yourself. The rack not only saves space, it has the added advantage of fitting well into almost any type of decor. And now for a sneak preview. This should be pleasing news to you. Guess what the extra spot on the rack is for? Coming soon is the Nakamichi 630 tuner preamplifier. As you've probably already guessed, it will conform to the same size and shape as the rest of the 600 series. The tuner will naturally be of top caliber. We're aiming for some of the lowest distortion figures known to FM stereo. The preamp section will be a much simplified version of the 610. That is to say, it will be more like a conventional preamp, and yes, it will have tone controls. I can hear the yays in the background already. That's really all I can tell you at the moment, mainly because that's about all I know, but further details will be announced shortly. So now the 600 series is complete. The 600, 610, 620, and 630 in the System 1 rack will be an awesome combination of versatility, compactness, and sheer performance. But the best is yet to come. You see, the combination I just mentioned is just one of many possible variations. For example, let's say a person wants more power than a single 620 can supply. Available very soon is our bridging adapter that transforms the Nakamichi 620 into a monaural power amplifier delivering 400 watts of continuous power into 8 ohms. I repeat, 400 watts into 8 ohms. This certainly puts the 620 into the class of super power amps. The increase in power is gained without any loss of other performance. The distortion and noise remain unbelievably low. So now, the power-hungry audiophile can equip the System 1 rack with a 600 cassette console, a Model 630 tuner preamp, and 2 Model 620 power amplifiers with bridging adapters. Or take another example. The customer who is more into taping and does a lot of dubbing and so forth can outfit his rack with 2 600 cassette decks, a 610, and a 620. Or instead of the 610, if he wants a tuner, he can opt for the 630, which will handle 2 tape decks. There are many other combinations. Here in my office, for example, I have a bank of 16 Model 600s, 4 to a rack, strictly for dubbing purposes. This, I believe, is the first true systems approach to home high-fidelity components. The System 1 rack is like the body of a camera with interchangeable attachments, such as lenses and finders. The user builds the system to suit his own requirements. The dealer should have a basic System 1 setup at all times. Now that is the rack-mounted 600, 610, 620, and 630. This rack can be wheeled to the different listening rooms as necessary. The flexibility of the system allows the salesperson to set up personalized and specialized demonstrations for those customers that require that extra bit of attention. Now what you have to stress over and over again is that the System 1 rack was designed for home use. Sure, some racks will find their ways into recording studios and the like, but this is not the basic intent of System 1. Compared to conventional 19-inch equipment racks, System 1 is much slimmer, more lightweight, and more compact. And most importantly, it is more attractive. The casters, for example, are imported from Sweden. They're very often used by designers for home furniture. They make the System 1 mobile, which can be another selling point. The other important point to keep in mind when talking about the System 1 is that each of the components in the system is absolutely state-of-the-art. The 600 sets new standards for 2-head cassette decks, and if you're not going to include the Nakamichi 700 and 1000, you might as well say the 600 sets new standards for cassette decks, period. The 610 offers an unmatched combination of versatility and performance. The 620 is fast gaining a reputation as one of the world's best power amplifiers, with distortion specs that beat out the closest competitors by an entire decimal point. And the 630 promises to be a superb FM tuner, with a preamp more conventional than the 610, yet no less compromising in performance. Of course, I'm not exactly unbiased in my assessment of these products, but even if you do not agree with me entirely, I hope you can share our excitement about System 1 and the 600 series. Mr. Nakamichi has asked me to pass on to you that he would like very much for everyone listening to this tape, especially sales personnel, to live with a System 1 for a while. Through everyday use, you will begin to appreciate the amount of thought and work that has gone into this project. This is particularly true of the 610 control preamplifier. We know this is not a preamp that will appeal to the great masses. It can never be sold on features alone. But it does incorporate the dreams and longings of many audiophiles, not just those of Mr. Nakamichi. The salesman who understands the 610 and the other 600 series components in this light will be better able to generate the enthusiasm in potential customers, which is required for the ultimate sale of the system. I have just a few more items I want to mention on this tape. The first has to do with the silver and black versions in which the 600 and 610 are currently available. Although some dealers have complained to us about the inventory problems associated with having both versions, we want you to know that we are still contemplating various possibilities. As expected, the black versions are outselling the silvers, but at the present time we have no intention of discontinuing the silver versions. When using the 600, 610, and 620 side by side, we find the arranging of a black 620 with a silver 600 and 610 on either side a very attractive and, I think, viable combination. We are also considering making the 620 available in a matte silver finish. The prototypes are extremely handsome. But these possibilities are still under consideration. Let us know how you feel about it. A quick commercial message now on our slimline reference monitor. Although this speaker was developed largely in response to comments on our original reference monitors to the effect that they were ugly and expensive, I think that Nakamichi philosophy on loudspeakers is still generally misunderstood. The slimline reference monitor, like its predecessors, was designed primarily for evaluation purposes. They will not appeal to the average hi-fi consumer, but they won't appeal to anyone unless you use the best available source material to demonstrate them. Nobody likes to be reminded of faults in his stereo system, and yet this is exactly what our speaker does. You have to keep this in mind and explain it to the customer, although the customer who falls in love with these speakers usually doesn't have to be told this. The point is that there is a market for a speaker so deathly accurate as this one. And whenever possible, we'd like you to demonstrate the slimline using the System 1. Please compare to other speakers in your store and draw your own conclusions. And finally, I want to inform you of the new technical bulletins which are available or will shortly be available. Most of you may have already read Nakamichi Tech Bulletin number 6 on the 600's IM suppressor. If not, let me know and I'll get one out to you. Number 7 on the 610 and number 8 on the 620 are currently being printed and will be available in the very near future. I have a bit of tape left, so I want to address myself to a couple of questions that I'm frequently asked these days. Number 1, the question of the L cassette. Are we going to go into L cassette? Well, we sent out a letter answering that question. Mr. Nakamichi sent out a letter several months ago. Our answer hasn't changed since then. We are still not interested in the L cassette as a format. We don't think it's going to be a successful format. We are just keeping our eyes open and sitting back and waiting because this does not seem to be the kind of project to rush into. Reasons why we are not interested in the L cassette is explained in that letter we sent a couple months ago. Please refer to that. And the other question I'm asked very often is, are we going to incorporate the IM suppressor in the 700 and the 1000. Well, that would seem to be a natural thing to do, but I would like to explain that the IM suppressor is a device which helps a two-head cassette deck fill the gap between it and a three-head device of comparable quality. In other words, you lose a certain amount of headroom, certain amount of signal-noise ratio, just because you have to record, you're forced to record with a narrow gap head in the case of a two-head cassette deck. And the IM suppressor is a device basically which lets you recapture the losses inherent in recording with a relatively narrow gap head. And therefore, and we've done experiments connecting the IM suppressor to our three-head machines, the 700 and the 1000, and we have found that it really offers no advantage in the cases of the 700 and the 1000. And so, at the present time, it is extremely doubtful that you will find the IM suppressor on the 700 and 1000. And this is the way I think you should explain it to customers who ask that question. The IM suppressor is a device which is helpful for two-head cassette decks, but not for three-head cassette decks. On the reverse side of this tape is demonstration material. It's music which was recorded in our Sound Research Center here in New York. The music is a Mendelssohn String Trio in D minor, number 1, opus 49. The players are Abraham Appelman, my younger brother, on violin, Sato Knudsen on cello, and Christopher O'Reilly on piano. Until next time, this is Haran K. Appelman for Nakamichi Spoken Here.